opinion on the current situation in Israel and Palestine?
Well, I think the occupation that Israel has been conducting basically since its inception, 1948, I think it's the natural sort of conclusion of 80 years of colonialism and then later apartheid within the existing Israeli territories. I think the armed resistance that has been conducted by several Palestinian groups, I think it is very much chickens coming home to roost sort of situation. It wouldn't happen if there wasn't a backdrop of that sort of colonial and quite brutal colonial history that has been conducted by Israel.
So do you think Hamas is justified in what they're doing at the moment, or would you condemn their actions?
So I wouldn't specifically say I condone the specific group Hamas because that's illegal in this country now. But I think the Palestinians as a people have a right to resist in whatever method they specifically see as useful. I don't think, with specific things like indiscriminate killing of civilians, I don't know how useful that is. I certainly wouldn't say I'm pro that. Although on a purely tactical basis, I don't know how useful I would say it is. And I wouldn't condemn it either. I think decolonization is inherently violent. The way you get around that is you don't colonize, basically. It's chickens coming home to roost, like I said. While Hamas, definitely, there has been, there's not much restraint in the way they act. They aren't a military in the same way that the IDF is. But in that sense, I think IDF has to be held to a higher standard if they are supposedly a Western military with their rules of engagement.
Do you see any possible solution for the region?
Not that can be conducted peacefully, I don't think. I don't think Israel wants to conduct something peacefully. The Palestinians don't have a choice. I think what had been going on before was a very slow destruction of the state of Palestine. What is now going on is a very quick one. I don't think. I think basically it comes to successful armed resistance from the Palestinians or nothing, or there will be no Palestine left. I think the closest we will have to a solution if the Israelis win is what the Israelis think of a solution, which is the destruction of the state of Palestine. I don't think there's going to be a peaceful solution anytime soon that doesn't involve some sort of genocide or displacement.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back, one and all, to the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. What's on tap for today? Well, as you saw before, it is the reporters out there in Britain going to college campuses and asking these students what are their thoughts on Hamas, what are their thoughts on the Palestinians, thoughts on Israel, the whole war, whether one side is justified, the other side is not justified. You know the question that they're asking. So we just had that kid. I have to say, starting off with this interview with this young man, he's, the situation is obviously known to them. It just depends upon what side they're coming down on. I took some notes here. One of the things he was talking about was, the chickens, coming home to roost, probably implying that, what was good for the goose at one time with the Israelis is now good for the gander or whatever. I don't really understand that logic, but, that's sort of a phrase that everybody seems to be tossing around whenever you say, well, tit for tat, this for that. I guess that's what they're talking about. Next thing, talking about the brutal colonization history of Israel. I wonder if we should just take a look and see what about the brutal colonization of Great Britain, Spain, France, Portugal, United States, other countries at the time. I mean, if you want to talk about imperialism or colonization, I think they might have taken the lead, from the Brits, if you want to talk that. But see, nobody wants, because that's past history. We've gone, how about this stuff, the internal conflicts that were going on with the IRA? The bombings that were happening in Britain when there was a conflict with the Irish Republican Army, all that stuff. All these things are happening, folks. Anyways, let's continue on and see what some other students have to say about the topic of pro-Hamas, pro-Palestine, or pro-Israel.
Complicated issue, but the reality of it is that Israel is a colonist power, and I would think that Palestine really does deserve to be free. It's just...
In what way could you see it being free as such?
I would think the best way to go about it is really is really just the dissolution of Israel. Honestly, it's something that
So now we have to dissolve the state of Israel to create the state of Palestine.
really hope gets sorted out soon, but in the grand scheme of things, I think people just really need to research their history. They really need to look into it and see that in so many cases, in practically every other case, Israel is in the wrong. I'm not condoning the fact that there's so much violence going on by so many different groups on both sides of the conflict, but the reality is the Palestinian people are fighting for themselves. And so long as they get their freedom that they've been fighting for like over 75 years, or roughly 75 years, until they get that, they aren't going to be like as focused on the fact of who's leading the charge. So obviously there's very like
So would you say that Hamas are justified in what they're doing then?
well, in terms of their goal to free Palestine from Israel control, yes, but in terms of the actions of violence that are going on, obviously not, because violence overall is not a way to achieve the like means that you need. But if an uprising is what it takes to free the people of Palestine, that's what it takes. It's just
there it is. Violence is never justified. However, terrorism is never justified. However, but that big B rises up.
simple as that. We've had cases of uprisings before, specifically in things like Vietnam.
The IRA.
The Western powers like the UK government, like the US government, and several others, they all come together and realize that they made a mistake in authorizing the creation of such a state, and for basically being the reason that so much death is going on in that region, and that every ideology has basically been hypercharged by their involvement. It's simple as that, I think.
So what's your opinion on the Israel-Palestine conflict?
Well, it's obviously a horrible situation. I do feel like the media is representing a false narrative with Israel.
In what sense?
In terms of like how long the conflict has been going on. But I mean, and like now with the terrorist group coming in and like just pushing that story forward instead of like all the atrocities that's been happening over the years, you know. But I'm not too educated, I guess.
And so would you say you condemn the way in which Israel's acted?
Yeah, I would say that.
And so Hamas is on the other side. Would you condemn them as well, or say they're justified?
That's a tricky question.
That becomes a tricky question. It's not a tricky question when you talk about whether or not Israel should be classified as a terrorist organization or using terrorist tactics. That you go right for the jugular right away. Absolutely, 100%. They should know better. But as soon as you ask about Hamas, we're not asking about the Palestinian people. We're talking about the Hamas terrorist group. As soon as you ask that, pause, indefinite pause. Wait a minute. The only thing good about this kid, what he knows, right, is basically, his head art. Very nicely done there. I don't know what that says or signifies, but it's got some cool head art. Head art. Anyways, let's continue.
Because obviously it's horrible what they did as well, but
horrible what they did,
if
but
that's justified for all the years of like damage that's happened in Palestine because of Israel.
So you mentioned obviously condemnation of Israel. Can you name any of the atrocities which you said they've committed?
I couldn't name any off the top of my head, but I just know that they've been just pushing the border. I mean, from what I've been told, so it's not a full, but they've just been pushing on the border for like the last, like forever, pretty much, the Holy Land as such. But yeah, that's it really. I don't really know.
So what's your opinion on the Israel-Palestine conflict at the moment?
So the first thing I want to say, I'm a Palestinian myself, and I think the terminology of conflict is wrong, because a conflict just denotes that there's an equal side, Both states, both countries have same kind of weapons, same stuff, but they actually don't. This has been going on for 75 years. I think the world, it's about time they're waking up to it. It didn't just happen 2 weeks ago, or, suddenly, they said, oh, why don't we do something about it? 75 years ago, my granddad was expelled from his country, he had to leave. There's been genocide and massacres. I think people just need to wake up, take some action. We say to our leaders, it's about time to take action too.
Hamas has been designated as a terrorist organization, but Israel hasn't.
Do you think Israel should be designated as a terrorist organization?
Well, if the shoe fits, wear it, right? It doesn't matter how much funding they receive.
The shoe fits, wear it right. One thing I'll tell you, folks, the British accent, even if the people aren't making sense, it just, with the accent, it just seems like it should be true, or that it has to, make some sense because it's so, the accent is just there. The chief hats wire it. That's really a poor accent. But anyways,
See from the US government or any Western government, people say it's a Western outpost. Whatever your opinion is, if you are a nation state and you want to be recognized as a sovereign state, that doesn't give you a right to kill innocent people, cut off food and water to people who won't receive it from anywhere else, or attack any aid given to these people. An open air prison, doesn't matter who they are, doesn't matter where they're from, doesn't matter what their lineage is, doesn't matter who their ancestors are. They have a right to live where they stand. You can't just kill them because you disagree with their existence. I don't agree with how the European settlers came to Palestine. Europe didn't want them. They were welcomed in Palestine. People love to, I don't know, everyone's wrong at this point. Who's right,
I think that the atrocities of what's going on in Palestine right now are unspeakable.
So would you then condemn or justify Israel's response?
this to me looks like one of them snooty professors. And the way she's answering the question in typical British fashion, reserved, nose up in the air. I would think that this is a professor. I could be wrong. But just in the way that she's sort of, questioning the questioner and making sure that she sort of, says the right things. It just sort of seems to me that way. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if she was, one of those hoity-toity, professors over at the, across the pond, as they say.
To the current terror attack?
I feel, again, that it's very complicated. It does seem to me that it seems a bit out of proportion, given the power and the presence they already have over that area, and the situations, the relative inequities in terms of Israel's resources versus what Gaza has, and Gaza being essentially the prisoners of Israel.
So do you think Hamas are then justified in what they're doing at the moment?
I don't really want to address justification.
I don't really want to address justification now, because since you asked about whether or not, the Hamas terrorists, if they were justified. So let's not talk about justification. But the previous answer that I gave about Israel, that was purely, then I don't really care about the justification. So there was no justification, because they're just a bigger power. They're just a bigger army. And everything that they do was out of proportion. But I digress.
Frankly, but as always, with an act of war, there's a retaliatory response. As I said, it seems to me that Israel's response was perhaps out of proportion against of the Israel-Palestine long-standing conflict.
I do have to say one thing here. She brings up the question about proportionality. What is proportional? That's a question to debate, to have, to put on the table, to basically ask and say, all right, a violent, absolutely atrocious, horrendous attack happened onto your nation state, against your people, against an ethnic group, by your enemy. And hundreds or thousands were killed, injured, maimed, mutilated. Terrorist attack. Call it what you want. But you have a right to defend yourself. The question is becoming like, this is what everybody's talking about, proportionality. What's proportional? Is it 1 for 1? Is it 2 for 1, 3 for 1? I don't know. But I do know one thing. If Hamas, and let's not go back to what happened in 1947, 1948, and all with the UN and the creation and the expulsion and the genocide on both sides and the atrocities, and everybody talks about, they go to the past. No one says, how do we move from the past and go to the future? Nobody ever or they try to talk about that, but it gets lost. But I do know one thing. If Hamas had not done this, there would have been no retaliation by the Israelis and thousands upon thousands of Gazans and Palestinians and those in the West Bank and other places, okay? Children, women, men, anybody out there. Those collateral damage would not have occurred. Anyways, folks, we appreciate you taking the time to watch. You've been watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I've been your host, Dr. Nasir. If you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel. Click the links. You know what to do. Check out the links to our videos above and below. I'll leave you with my final thought, which is, when you're right, you're right. And when you're left, you're wrong. We'll see you again next time, folks. Take care and stay safe.